Hello, thank you for joining me for the Collaboration Transitions Program Introduction. In brief, this video introduces the Collaboration Transitions Program, covers the transition maps and deployment guides produced by the program, including where this documentation fits in the overall preferred architecture documentation framework. I'm Matt Jordy, and I'm a technical marketing engineer on the Collaboration Technology Group Technical Marketing Engineering team, which created and manages the Collaboration Transitions Program.
Okay, let's begin by understanding why there is a need for the Collaboration Transitions Program. The fact is, in order for our customers to move collaboration workloads within their deployment, it is important for them to know how to get from where they are today to where they want to be tomorrow. Collaboration Transitions is meant to map the transitions of existing deployments to the latest Cisco collaboration applications and services. The Collaboration Transitions Program provides that map so our customers can make these transitions. We have typically thought about these transitions as being just about moving customers from on-premises to cloud applications and services. But in fact, our customers may be looking to transition between on-premises and a hybrid deployment. Note that a hybrid deployment is a combination of both on-premises and cloud products or solutions. Or they may be looking to transition from hybrid to a pure cloud deployment, or even from on-premises to on-premises, hybrid to hybrid, or cloud to cloud deployments. In all cases, collaboration transitions help our customers know how to get from point A to point B. Before we continue, let's make sure we are clear on what the Collaboration Transitions Program is. The program delivers a new type of prescriptive validated deployment model which builds on the existing collaboration preferred architectures, or PA. The deployment model is focused on transitioning existing collaboration deployments to the latest Cisco products and solutions, and that's whether these are on premises, hybrid on premises and cloud, or just cloud. It's also worth calling out the objective of the Collaboration Transitions Program, which is to remove technical barriers for the existing customer base to ease the transition of collaboration workloads to the latest Cisco collaboration solutions. Now let's take a look at the lifecycle for the Collaboration Transitions Program. First, we start by defining a transition validation scenario that might be undertaken by our customers. This could be a transition to on-premises, hybrid, or cloud products or solutions. Next, for each identified scenario, we build out and validate this transition in an internet-connected test lab environment to ensure that the transition is viable. During the build and validation phase, we identify gaps and technical barriers that might prevent transition to the latest offerings, whether on-premises, hybrid, or cloud. And of course, the outcome of this validation and gap identification is that we document the transition by creating a transition map and a list of steps required to transition the workload covered by this validated scenario. Finally, and perhaps most important, we provide feedback in the form of a detailed gaps report to the product team or teams to ultimately improve the products and solutions involved in this particular transition scenario. This in turn should help close gaps and remove barriers for customers transitioning. Then, as you can see, this is an iterative process. That is, we repeat the process for each scenario as new versions or improvements become available. What about the stakeholders for this program? As you can see, we have identified a number of stakeholders for the Collaboration Transitions Program. This includes the Collaboration Technology Group, or CTG, engineering and product teams, Cisco sales and support and services personnel, and of course, most importantly, our customers and partners. As we identified these program stakeholders, we did some simple math. We understood that by improving products from CTG and adding to that shortened cycles for our sales and support teams as a result of the program documentation, that this would ultimately add up to increased adoption of the latest Cisco collaboration products and solutions by our customers and partners. Now let's have a look at the program documentation. There are two documentation outputs for this program. First are the transition maps, which are brief documents which provide graphical transition maps illustrating the transition from start to finish and summarize lists of benefits and differences between the existing and transition deployments. And second are the deployment guides, which are more in-depth documents which provide both technical background and deployment steps and considerations for making the transition from the existing to the latest versions of the various collaboration products and solutions. Both of these documents are published for each validated transition scenario at the program website, which you can find at www.cisco.com/go/CT for collaboration transitions. Here's the Collaboration Transitions Program landing page. Again, it's available at www.cisco.com/go/CT, where you can find the transition documents. The validated scenarios are grouped by workload, for example, meetings, messaging, and calling. The transition documentation column of each workload transition table provides links to both the transition map and the deployment guide for each of the validated scenarios. Now that you understand the collaboration transition documents and where you can find them, let's quickly review how these fit into the overall preferred architecture document framework. Of course, central to the framework are the preferred architecture's overview, CVDs, and supplemental documents, providing prescriptive design guidance for on-premises, hybrid, and even cloud architectures. The preferred architectures ultimately depend on the Collaboration Solution Reference Network Design Guide, or SR&D, which provides foundational design recommendations and best practices, as well as fundamental collaboration architectural details, and it is the place to go if the coverage provided by the preferred architecture's overviews, CVDs, and alternate designs is not sufficient for a specific scenario. And finally, the collaboration transitions also fall under the preferred architectures document framework, as they are based on the preferred architectures as the starting point before the specific transitions are undertaken. And for your reference, here are the URLs for finding all the documentation under the preferred architecture document framework. The preferred architecture CVDs and other docs are available at www.cisco.com/go/PA for preferred architectures. The collaboration SR&Ds are available at www.cisco.com/go/SR&D. And as I previously mentioned, the collaboration transitions, transition maps, and deployment guides are available at www.cisco.com/go/CT. Finally, before we conclude here, I'd like to cover the transition map and deployment guide documents in a bit more detail. Let's first take a look at the transition map document. As an example, here's a portion of the transition map for the transition between Unified Communications Manager, or Unified CM, and WebEx calling. First, the transition map document provides a visual map of the overall transition broken down into high-level steps, starting with the initial state of the deployment, what we are transitioning from, in this case, Unified Communications Manager calling, and going to the final state, where it is that we are transitioning to, in this case, WebEx calling. Now, depending on the transition, there may only be 2 steps, but in this example, there happen to be 3 steps. In the case of this transition between Unified Communication Manager and WebEx calling, there's an interim step where both Unified Communications Manager and WebEx calling coexist. Next, the transition map document also highlights what is changing with the transition deployment and shows what the new deployment will look like, as well as the post-transition workload flow. In this example, we can see a list of changes along with the topology of the WebEx calling deployment, highlighting the changes in the final step of the transition. In addition, we see the call flows once the transition to WebEx calling is complete. Finally, the transition map includes information and considerations for the differences between the pre-transition deployment and the target post-transition deployment. In the case of Unified Communications Manager to WebEx calling transition, this includes licensing and endpoint considerations, as well as others. Now, how about the deployment guide? Let's take a closer look at the deployment guide document of this transition, of the Collaboration Transitions Program. Again, using the Unified Communications Manager to WebEx calling transition as an example. The deployment guide provides not only technical background on the components of the solution, but also the actual transition steps required to make the transition. The step-by-step transition guide is divided into 3 parts, starting with the pre-transition steps and consideration section, which covers the various things that a customer might do to prepare for the workload transition. For example, in the case of the Unified Communication Manager to WebEx calling transition, this includes things like readiness assessments and taking inventory of existing components and functionality. Next is the transition steps and consideration section, which describes the actual steps required to implement the transition. For example, making required infrastructure changes like firewall configuration to enable cloud connectivity in the case of Unified Communication Manager to WebEx calling transition. This will also include things like enabling integrations and configuring new components and features. And finally, the post-transition steps and consideration section, which takes care of all the things a customer must do to finalize and clean up after the transition has been completed. In the case of the Unified Communications Manager to WebEx calling transition, this includes, for example, decommissioning the Unified Communication Manager service nodes once all users and devices have been transitioned to the WebEx cloud. So as you can see, the deployment guide is intended to walk the customer or partner through the transition process step by step from the planning and preparing stage all the way to the end and the final bits of cleanups required to complete the transition. All right, we've covered a lot of information in this session, so I'd like to quickly review the highlights. First, we learned the Collaboration Transitions program is meant to address the transition of collaboration workloads from existing products and solutions to the latest available versions. Next, as I explained, Collaboration Transitions is a new type of prescriptive, validated deployment model built upon the collaboration preferred architectures. The program helps to improve solutions by closing the feedback loop with our product teams through iterative validation of each transition. And finally, the collaboration transitions documentation, the transition maps and deployment guides are part of the PA documentation framework and can be found on the Collaboration Transitions program landing page at www.cisco.com/go/CT for collaboration transitions. This concludes the Collaboration Transitions introduction. Thank you for your attention.